What is up, crew? It's your boy Kaycem, and on today's stream, we're actually going to be looking at all these submissions from the community, and I'll be giving you guys feedback on maybe some of the stuff that you've already done, and maybe what you could do further to push your art growth just a little bit more. So with that, let's get this one started. But yes, we have here a lot of submissions, and we're going to try to go through as many of these as we can. And honestly, I think with a lot of these, we're going to try to see where we can maybe find just a few of the fundamentals that maybe you can invest in just a little bit more there. But let's start off here with some of the ones on this side. All right, so taking a look here at these submissions, we're going to have the first one here submitted by Riot. And I think overall, I actually really like how you did these turns for your drawings. I would say if you're going to tackle a turn like this, an easy little trick that you can do is you can actually just kind of line up some of these proportions, right? And if you line up the head, I think you did a pretty decent job here. And I think you did a pretty decent job with lining up kind of the relative placement of the feet and the torso. But you can also do the same things here actually with the hand as well. And you'll notice here how, for example, with this hand, this one may be a little bit too long, right? Because you see the wrist on this one. So I think by just bringing it up a little bit, I think that might actually help you out with having that kind of position in check. So there you go. Great submission again from Riot. But speaking about volume and and all that stuff, let's go to the next one here, which is submitted from Light Desu. So if you take a look at the reference here that you have, notice how there's actually a good amount of flow. Like there's the pose here, you know, but there's actually a nice kind of gesture flow here from the arms here like that. There's a lining up here almost of like that finger as it flows here like that. And then similarly, notice how there's kind of a curve, right? There's like a tension right here. There's a curve here on the back. And that overall follows this gesture like this. Like yours ends up being a little bit more straight. The elbow here kind of goes boom, boom. So how do you capture some of that gesture that you have and then also bring it in now and make it so that you have a bit more of a flow? And some things that you can do is sometimes you can just play with using straights versus curves. You'll notice, for example, with your arm here, both sides are pretty straight, and you can totally do that for a style. But I would say if you maybe vary up a little bit of the volume, vary up some of the rhythms that you'll see here like this, I think that'll actually go a long way. And even just this alone, I think already did a good amount just to kind of add some rhythm, right? Just some rhythm there for the arm. Here is a submission where now we have a lot of gesture, right? This is one from Alan22211738. I will say this is a hard gesture to do. So props for you for even trying a gesture like this, because oftentimes what ends up happening is even if you were to get this drawing right, chances are it's going to look wonky out of context. So I always like to try to find, especially for these crazy gesture poses, like what are the main rhythms and try to group them together as best as you can. Oftentimes that does a lot for a gesture. Notice how your arm curves this way, but in the reference here, that arm actually curves almost as if it's curving into this arm right here or into that hand right there. So if we take your arm and we kind of follow that flow like this, let's also do that thing that I mentioned in the other advice, which was, you know, straights versus curves, right? But personally, what I would say for you, Alan, is I would say get really comfortable with some of the more maybe simpler gestures, because I think by doing something like this, while it does look cool and it looks fun and challenging, oftentimes it makes it difficult to really capture some of the gesture that you're seeing. Something else too that I think is challenging about this gesture that I'm not really seeing with your drawings is you have to have a really good understanding of overlap, I think, to really make this gesture sell. And so what I mean by that is you'll notice when you look at the arm of this character, right? There's an overlap here of the folds, and there's these overlaps that are kind of crunching the fabric together. And that right there really sells the depth of this character pushing, along also with the shadow too, right? So there's a shadow right here that's being cast on this character, or that's being created by this character, that I'm not really seeing in your image as much, right? I see it a little bit here, but I think it actually goes a little bit further. Well, here we've got another submission. We've got, this one is from, I believe, Cowboy Canuck. I think whenever it comes down to studying gesture, these are the type of studies I actually want to see beginners doing, because it really focuses on the core aspect of gesture, right? You're not getting caught up in all the little details. You're not getting distracted by, you know, all of these arms and flow. You're just looking at the core aspects. Now, what I would say could maybe take your gesture studies a little bit further is now that you're capturing some of the main components of your gesture, which is great, let's also do a couple things now where let's actually check, right? Let's check a little bit of the angles. So let's take a look at the angle here of the hands and see how they flow. Let's look at the angle of the feet and let's see how they flow. And this is kind of a similar feedback to the one I gave here for this submission, but it's different in that we're using it now also in tandem with gesture. So you'll notice here, notice how your hand for your gesture goes all the way here. Notice how this back leg is kind of like right here, which is fine actually, but I also want to pay attention to maybe some of the vertical space, or sorry, the horizontal space between the two, right? So these are some kind of like quick checks you can do with your drawings. And you'll notice it actually with a few of yours that I'm kind of catching is notice how, for example, in this gesture, look at the placement of the feet, right? This foot is a little bit further in space, but in yours, you actually flipped it. Now, again, that's completely fine to mix things up, but if you are going to be studying these gestures, I would say this would be like that next step into really taking your forms and really understanding the core components of them. But all right, we got here another submission. This one I couldn't fit onto the screen, but this submission was by, I believe, Titano Ron. I think they've actually got a little bit of the best of both worlds, where they've got some good gesture, they've got some good forms, and I think what would really benefit you now is just kind of tightening up a little bit further, right? It's like, I think with a lot of these quote unquote fundamentals, these are, again, going to be things that you'll revisit no matter what level you are in your art journey. And you'll actually see that as we look at some of the other submissions from today, because there was a lot of other good submissions too. And we'll see that even though they've got a lot more detail and they're more dynamic, gesture and form is still going to be such a huge, huge aspect of all of this. Let's find the rhythm of the shoulders. Let's find the rhythm here of that spine. And then let's kind of find the rhythm of the legs. And just try to find those basic rhythms. And by doing that, let's see if we can get a more concrete gesture. You'll kind of see there, this exercise, this whole line technique of simplifying the gesture is actually kind of busted because it really makes you understand and build confidence on what exactly are the core aspects of your design. So by doing that and using these simple lines, you'll feel more confident now that when you go in here, you're going to say, okay, well, let's go in and let's add a little bit more detail. Let's add a little bit more volume now. But also sometimes confidence can be built by just practicing more. I know it's tough to say sometimes because it's like, oh man, I got to draw more. But realistically, that's kind of a very valuable advice. I hate sometimes when I was younger, I used to hear the advice of someone telling me, oh, just draw, bro. You want to get better, just draw more. The reality of it is they don't explain to you that what they mean to say is that the more mileage you build, the more experience you have with drawing, the more confident you become, the more of these topics and these fundamentals you understand, and then later are able to bend and twist. But if you don't ever practice these things, you're never gonna be able to execute on them confidently. And I think that's kind of what I mean to say when I say just draw more. Draw what you're doing now, but just keep doing that because you're doing a great job. We got this one here. This one's submitted by Fukuro. I like how you have the overall look and feel of your character. Like, I think all the details are there. I think surprisingly, something that I think you did really well with too was the coloring. Like, you actually had good composition with your colors. Very sparse use of light colors, good ranges of dark colors here, ranges of mid-tone colors here. So all really sound decisions that you've made. Let's go ahead here. And now let's take a look at breaking this one down a little bit more. How can we push this further? Something here I'm noticing is the hair here kind of is pretty level, and you're kind of ending up with some of these tangents on what appears to be possibly a headband on this character. So I would love to see maybe pushing some of these forms out. Like, maybe let's actually take this hair. Let's try to break it up a little bit, add some variety to it, but let's try to make sure we're not hitting those tangents for the hair that we have. Similarly from here, what I think you could benefit from too is taking some of these shapes and let's add some variety to them. Like, maybe this one right here is kind of short like that. That's fine. let's kind of make this one bigger, and maybe let's kind of bring this one a little bit more, and let's kind of then add some more details as we get closer and closer in. So let's just take a look at that and let's see how that compares. Yeah, like I think that to me feels a little bit more, it just kind of, it has a little bit more variety to it, and I think that just makes us feel a little bit more dynamic. Let's take a look now at this submission. So this submission is by Shiu. I think you've actually got a lot of really good elements, but I feel like you are maybe getting too caught up in the squigglies. You're getting too caught up in the rhythms. Let's take a look at maybe some of the basic shape, right? And it's good, by the way. I like the rhythms. I like how you're thinking about that. But let's not lose sight of the underlying form and the underlying structure of the character here. So this is the base of our character, right? And then on top of that base, we have boom, 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 something like this. So the rhythm for this character is 1, 2, 3, curvy shape. Notice how the nose, the mouth, and the eyes actually line up pretty well. So I would actually take a look at some of that and see if you can maybe line up some of these features just a tad bit. And by doing that, I'm not even going to try to redraw anything. I'm actually just going to try to move some elements around. So you can kind of like see how I brought that eye down a little bit, and I kind of just tilted it a little bit. And what that ends up doing is I think it centers the eyes just a tad bit more with the proportion that we have here. But there you go. Great submission, honestly. All right, we got here one more on this set. And this set here is from Starlite. One of the strongest things I've seen is that you have really good design elements, and a lot of the characters you've drawn feel very unique. They have good silhouettes, they read well, and they feel cool. They just have a nice element to them in design. And I think what you could really benefit from is just a couple things, actually, a few things. One, let's try to take a look now at some of the structure of your character. And I think if you really want to lock in on some of the forms that you have, I think playing around with some of those rhythms that I mentioned earlier with a few other feedbacks would really help you out a good amount. So here, I'm just trying to take your forms and actually trying to find some like interesting rhythms between them, right? Pushing some of those features out, and from there, adding a little bit more of asymmetry, adding a little bit more of flow. So if you take a look at the before and after there, just off of that alone, I think this arm feels a little bit more dynamic, right? Because we're pushing some of those rhythms across the board on that arm. But the other thing too that I would take a look at is when you're doing these kind of foreshortened overlaps and stuff like this, like let's say you have a leg right here, right? Something that you can do is imagine these things as cylinders. And if they are a cylinder, how do they all overlap? So here you have like the knee. I'm imagining the knee is going to go here. And I don't have the reference, so I'm just kind of imagining this one out from, you know, the top of my brain here. But sometimes adding in subtle little lines, and I'll show you afterwards, can really help out. Now, other things too that you can do, which I'll do right now, is sometimes adding in the overlap. So like that knee right here, right? Adding in a little bit of a bump right there and a groove for that knee, and just showing these subtle overlaps can really help sell these forms further. Sometimes what I like to do also, if I'm designing a character, is I like to kind of put in a little bit of an overlap, like a little bit of a cross contour. And I think you're already doing that with the hair. So maybe just kind of using that a little bit more to sell that foreshortening that you're trying to go for. But let's take a look at the before and after for all of these. So here, boom, before, after, little subtle changes, before, after, and then this one right here, before, after. Not bad. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but I'm actually taking each set here progressively more and more in terms of like level of skill, right? So we started off here, I think, with some of the more core fundamentals. Then these were more kind of design element stuff. But now we're going to get into some of you guys who I think have a really good grasp on all of these things. But how do we even then take it further from there, right? So what I like about this design is there's a clear readability here from the just kind of the overall silhouette of the character, right? You have this guy here. He's kind of like an executioner type character. He's got a big build, right? And so from a design standpoint, this actually reads incredibly well. I really like this design a lot, and I wouldn't even change too much of this design personally. I think what would actually really sell this design for me is if you maybe, and here I'm just trying to simplify it further, I think if you maybe took some of the main elements of your design and try to push it even further. I would have loved to see maybe a little bit more emphasis on the arms, and let's just kind of roid them out, you know, like let's get some bigger deltoids in here, some big biceps. Let's like really push those biceps further. Let's extend those triceps out a little bit more, so that way there's a bit more breathability there. And I think for this one, I would have loved to see just a little bit more of these design elements being pushed. Last but not least, let's also really push the design of this cape that you have. Like, let's really kind of have fun with it. And I think don't be afraid to go a little bit more crazy here with this design of this cape that you have, to kind of go for that more graphic, that graphic style I think that you're aiming for. But let's take a look at this before and after. This is kind of an interesting one. So first of all, here, we'll do it like this. So before the arm changes, right? Just kind of roiding those arms out, like that alone, I think already does a lot. Right? Like you really are selling that this character is kind of buff and stuff. And then when you add some of the more tightening there of the forearms and pushing out some of that silhouette just a little bit further, you kind of get this top heavy character, and you also end up with some of the more triangular shapes. But great submission. Let's do the next one here, which was submitted by Mayhem. For this one right here, I think for your rough sketch, you have a lot of really good elements. Like I love, for example, the rhythm of the hair. Things kind of flow out, things kind of go back into space. You have depth in the hair, you have depth in the form by things kind of moving forward, things going backwards in space. Like all of that is very readable and clear. Now let's take a look at something that's going on here. I think what was kind of interesting was when I took a look at this rough sketch that you had, it actually looked to me like the leg was kind of bending forward a little bit. But then I think when I looked at the final sketch, it almost to me felt like the leg was going back because of the positioning of the leg here, right? So I think these are actually two different positions for the leg. One here, leg is forward in space and taking a step forward. This one is leg taking a step back. And so if you want to really sell that idea that the character's legs are stepping back, we can actually try to use some of that here with the fabric. So what ends up happening is if you have the leg going back into space right there, I would probably see maybe a little bit more tension on the character, right? The character's skirt there as we're creating tension here on this leg going forward into space. So maybe I would see more lines like this. And you kind of did that here where you actually did add a line. You added a line right here. And then this line was to kind of showcase a little bit of that plane change. So I would have loved to keep some of that line right here. But this time we're using it to create some tension. Other things that you can do is you can really sell this bag going kind of back into space there. And if that leg is going back into space, maybe we would actually kind of turn it a little bit more, right? Turn that bag a little bit more. And so that way it almost looks like it's facing kind of away from us and to the side because her leg is being positioned back into space. But I think that's honestly some of the main feedback I would give. Here's that before and after. Right? Just kind of really selling that readability through some of the clothing folds, selling it through some of the overlap, and also selling it, I think, through some of the changes in proportion to really push that depth of that character. But overall, great drawing. This is a really great submission. This one is by ArtartProfit. So this is kind of the feedback I've been given to a few people who do want to go for more of a dynamic approach. This kind of foreshortened look. You do a great job of that, and I'll highlight it for some of you who might be missing it. For example, right here, there's an overlap of that deltoid muscle. Then you see here that overlap of that arm. Look at that. Look at that muscle right here, that line work. Beautiful, beautiful line work, simple lines. And these things all kind of combine together to create subtle overlaps on the character. I would say you're doing a great job already. But let's kind of push that overlap a little bit so that way we don't have these tangents across the arm and the bandages. So like that little overlap right here I just did, you can kind of see the before and after there. And notice how by just adding in and pushing some of the silhouette, look at how you can really get some good depth in your illustration. Like it's nice to see how subtle overlaps like this can really push. And I'll show you the before and after there. It might be hard to see. Let me know if you guys don't see it and I will try to highlight it further. In particular, I'm talking about like this line like right here, like this little section, right? Breaking that silhouette, even for these smaller sections, can, I think, really sell the fabric and the material. I think here it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell what's going on with the fabric because we start to blend two different colors and two overlaps. So I would try to find here some like readability. Some things are being lost here. So this is either going to be interior of the jacket, and this will be a continuation of the material of that like rolled up bandages, or it's part of the jacket, and in which case we combine the two. But you can see here how, look at that, before and after. It's so subtle. And I'm also trying to graphically push these shapes because we have a nice contrast from the sharp angles right here to the flowing hair that you have over here. And so sometimes by pushing curves versus sharp angles and shapes, we'll actually make it so that you can get these elements to be even more separated from each other. The sword here is being held almost at like the upper half of this hilt. It almost looks like she's not fully grasping it because the hilt is just so big. So I would maybe pay attention to some of that, because if you take the hilt here and if you follow the contour that you have and the way that you lit it, right? This is almost how I imagine this hilt to read. And you can kind of see here that once we get to this portion of the sword, it almost actually looks like the sword is, it's either going to be that the sword is off or the hilt is off. It's a very subtle thing where we're lining it up just a little bit better with that hilt that you drew. And I think that would kind of sell that sword being balanced out. It's a little tricky. It's a little tricky because, again, you have multiple options here, right? There's a lot of ways to change this design. And it could also just be that this is how the sword works, where the sword has a lower hilt, and then in which case, then I would change the position of the hand. But I don't want to change your position of your hand. I want to keep it as same as I can. So instead, I'm going to try to shift that sword and then maybe even like take where that hilt is going to be and kind of move that hilt. It's such a subtle thing, but you kind of have to check for these things, because then when you actually get into detailing the arm and the hand and how the hand holds that hilt, it will not distract the viewer, right? The immersion won't be lost on the illustration. And I think when you do all that, I think it'll just read better, but it's so subtle. All right, so let's take a look here at this submission from Alexthegreat, and their submission said that they have two of the current characters that they're working on, along with the general critique. I'd like to know how the outfits are looking together. I'm trying to make them feel cohesive. If you want to, for example, get a cohesiveness between these two characters, what I would say is to try to blend in some elements between the two that really would make them sell each other, sell that they are part of like a set. But I would maybe take, like, for example, this arm, and let's see if we can like do something crazy here where we can actually take this and like make that the same color and the same shape, right? So sometimes you can do stuff like that where you take similar elements from each design, and that way you are still utilizing them, but you're obviously, you know, they're different design elements here. But by doing something like that, you can still retain that these are similar characters in that same world, but they're like a duo. And so these are little things that you can do to the design that would make them feel more tied to each other. This character to me feels more fantasy, and this character feels more like city slash like almost like cyberpunk, you know what I'm saying? So I would maybe try to find maybe a middle ground between the two, because right now these like boots feel to me very fantasy armor type of thing, but then she has like these kind of sneakers, right? So I would say there's nothing wrong with maybe him feeling more fantasy, but I would try to pick between the two elements. So either you push her to be a little bit more fantasy, or I would maybe just get rid of these kind of boots, these type of armored boots, and then change them with maybe something that's a little bit more matching of the character on the left. So maybe he has like straps like this. You get what I'm saying? Because I think right now we're seeing two different types of design elements here, and I think that is taking away from them being a pair for each other. And again, you don't have to do that. Like if he really is like a more fantasy type of character, that's completely fine. Keep that look. But we just have to make sure that's clear and readable elsewhere in the story. That's not related to the actual just visual design of this character. All right, so we've got here, I think, two more, and we've managed to knock them all out, which is insane. So this one right here is submitted from Julia, and I think Julia had mentioned in their submission, they had submitted in their thing that they have been doing a mannequin challenge. They're on their 50th mark, and they wanted to just, one, ask if they should either be practicing taking the pose and drawing it from different angles, or starting to add some more anatomy to my forms. I think you can do a bit of both. Personally, I think you're at a level where your things look solid, things look good. Let's have fun and do a bit of both. I don't think it hurts. I think maybe what you could do is for the simpler mannequins, push the perspective more, and for the more and then for some of the other mannequins, keep the pose simple, keep the perspective simple, but then focus on anatomy, right? And then once you feel good about those two things, kind of blend the two together. I think when you take a look at some of your initial poses, right, you can kind of see here, you've got, you know, the standard cylinder, and these are all good. I actually think you're doing a great job with all of these. Pretty good stuff here. You're bending the forms a little bit here. You have the curves here. But I think that there's something interesting here that you're doing that I'm noticing now with your more recent stuff. Like there's something about these forms that to me feel a little bit more tighter. Like I think here you have a clear read on the bend, and you have here a more subtle kind of straighter curve, versus here, I mean, you have a bend, but then I think some of the shapes maybe kind of feel boom, boom, boom. Whereas here you kind of like simplified it. And I think maybe that's what it is. You've gotten a better grasp of not only form, but utilizing gesture in your forms to make them feel a little bit more, the mannequins feel like they're coming to life. I will say, here's a little critique here. I think that something you could focus on is if the perspective of your character is right here, pay attention to how these things kind of converge. Because you have here, for example, these kind of converging here, but then you have this hip converging here, which is fine because the hip is bending and twisting a little bit. But I have a feeling that if you just took just a little bit there, just bend it a little bit there like that, and then you also took this head and you shrunk it a little bit, and maybe even, actually not shrink it, but kind of like push it a little bit back in perspective. Maybe even apply, maybe we do this. No, that's not right. This is good. If you did a little bit of that, I feel like this right here would make it feel more locked in with that rest of the perspective. You see that? Before and after. It makes it so that that lower portion of the torso here, this one right here, isn't as stretched out. It doesn't feel as unnatural of a stretch because we are we're kind of moving that torso back in perspective. You see, this is the before and this is the after. Subtle changes. So all right, let's go ahead and let's take the last one of today, which is a submission by J-Jack Draws. What was interesting about this one was they had said that they'd taken something from a weaker design of their portfolio from a couple, I guess from a while back, and they kind of redesigned it. And the old designs were the ones on the bottom here. And these are the newer designs that they did. Let's see. So they said that the old designs were really rushed and not really well thought out. So I took the time to give them more personality and put time in the overall designs that they deserved. I'm particularly still not feeling the outfits 100%, and I feel like they need more storytelling. Wanted some critiques before diving into the line art. Okay, so for context here, this character in red is a fashion designer that uses her boutique as a front for her real job as a Robin Hood-esque information broker. She gathers gossip from the corrupt elite clientele she serves and uses the information against them to help her community. The guy next to her is her right-hand man, bodyguard, when she's out in the public eye, and the other three are her watchers who get the word on the street about the shady business in town. Let's take a look at these. All right, so these were your initial designs. And I like how if you just look at this, right? These characters here, they've got good elements to them. But I think as you pointed out, some of the initial design here doesn't really tell you much about the character in the story. Maybe this one right here, you can tell she's a little bit sassy, maybe a boss girl. She's got that pose and she's got these kind of different colors, vibrant colors, which might lead to, lead someone to feel like, okay, maybe they're fashionable to some degree, but we don't really know much about these other characters. Like these four to me kind of feel like your standard civilian in maybe a techie type of world, because they have some of that tech wear fit, which is usually denoted commonly by kind of these boxy, let me show you, these little boxy shapes that we see across the clothing, right? These right here, these right here, these right here. And so you said, let's take a look at that and let's try to really push these out. And I feel like you did an incredible job with these two characters. You took the elements further and you really made her not only feel bossy and sassy and all that stuff, but you also definitely gave, that personality through the clothing. So you can tell that she's a little bit more fashionable, right? She's got here the shoes, she's got the pants. And for these elements, I'm not really going to change too much. But what I might recommend instead is maybe let's look into finding an element here of this character that could be unique to her. Like, let's say, for example, she's got these triangular shapes, right? This is kind of her. She's kind of maybe a Robin Hood character. She's dynamic, right? Robin Hood-esque. So let's kind of push on these designs a little bit more. So just kind of like subtle things like that, that really help give her that bossy look, I think would really sell well. So really kind of pushing some of those elements. Let's kind of knock this one back a little bit so that we have less of a tangent. A good separation there of the clothing. So doing things like that would be great. This right here is going to overlap. So let's do that. I think the gesture of the pose is great. Maybe like we can tie in the element here by giving her like triangular earrings, just to kind of keep that motif going about this character that you have. And then right here, maybe we can really figure out what's going on here with the clothing too. Like maybe it opens out like that. Or if it does open out this way, let's try to see if we can maybe simplify it out a little bit. Like I feel there's an element here that we can do where it like maybe drops down. So that's more triangular. Because I think my concern here is that these two lines are starting to feel a little too close to these main lines. So here's what I would do. I would either keep these, but then maybe bring this jacket in more. So that way there's less competition of overlap and less occurrence of a tangent. So I would maybe do that, right? Just try to kind of really push these elements in and kind of tighten them more. And if you look at that, that actually kind of helps establish more of that triangular motif that I think you were already going for. But yeah, overall, great submission. Honestly, every single one was good. If you guys are into any of these things, maybe you want to get your own stuff critiqued or you want to level up as well with some of the fellow artists, I have something here called the After School Art Crew. By supporting me, you'll get access to high quality resources, notes, you'll get access to a community that actually chats pretty often, pretty regularly out here. You'll get access to resources that I don't share on my streams, but you'll get, you'll be able to grab like my brushes, in-depth notes, all of that stuff. And this right here is going to be the big one. Every month, I will host an exclusive art stream dedicated to critiquing your work. And what is valuable about this is sometimes it's hard for you to look at your work and to see what you need to improve on. Also, I actually wrote down here a guide for self-taught character artists that actually goes over all the fundamentals that you might want to look at and all the different videos I have here linked. And I'm excited for those of you who did submit to, submit again next time and see how much you've grown from there. Stay tuned.